The Boeing B-29 Superfortress Enola Gay is the first aircraft to deliver an atomic weapon in combat in history. It's on August 6, 1945, and it led to the events to the end of World War II in August 1945 of VJ Day. Well, you know, the B-29 is the most advanced propeller-driven airplane in the world during World War II, especially 1945. And it's selected for the atomic mission. That platform has been proven with the 20th Air Force of being able to carry up to 20,000 pounds of bombs, the 2,000 miles to Japan and back, and the modifications of what are called the silver plate bombers, which the 15 bombers of the 509th Composite Group are modified for the atomic mission. It's a 10,000 pound bomb, atomic, and all the defensive armament's removed, and it's modified just for this atomic mission. And so you already have an airplane capable of high speed, high altitude, long range, and then you add the capability to carry this one specific weapon. So it's the perfect platform for carrying the atomic bomb. You know, the 509th is a specially trained unit. They're activated in December of 1944, and they train specifically for the delivery of a single atomic bomb. They're activated, they go into a theater in the Marianas North Field on Tinian in the spring and summer of 1945, and they start having practice runs to Japan and back, dropping they're called pumpkins. They're big, the Fat Man bombs that just have TNT in them. And so they know they're going to be practicing for the delivery of this single weapon. By the time of August, in which the first mission, the Hiroshima mission, is planned, Colonel Paul Tibbets is the commander of the unit. Tibbets picks this airplane off the line at the Glen Martin factory in Omaha, Nebraska. And Lewis receives it, the crew fly it over, there at Tinian. So on August 5th, Tibbets says, this is my airplane. I'm going to fly for this atomic mission, the first one. He has a person paint his mother's name on the side of the aircraft. And he's designated himself the command pilot. Dutch Van Kirk as the navigator, and Tom Farabee as the bombardier. And they're also joined by Captain William S. Parsons as the weaponeer and overall mission commander, and Morris Jeppesen, who's the assistant weaponeer. So they're added to this crew. Some of the crew members come off, so they're bumped from the crew. Robert Lewis walks up and he's like, well, this has been my airplane, and it's now named Enola Gay, and I'm the co-pilot. And at 3 in the morning, August 6th, they take off from North Field, and they rendezvous with other aircraft, other B-29s of the 509th at Iwo Jima, and then they fly the rest of the 2,000 miles to Hiroshima and back. So it's a very procedural mission. They've trained for this. They all have their jobs. From the crew of 12, you have a private running the radio to a Navy captain who's been part of Project Alberta, which is the delivery program, the building of the actual bomb. So you have this range of experience, range of service being represented. So it's a very special mission. But also it's that camaraderie, the esprit de corps, the professionalism of this Air Force crew, especially that core unit of Tibbets, Farabee, and Van Kirk that gets the airplane, the Enola Gay, to Hiroshima, that route. Then Farabee aims and drops the bomb, and they get back home. The importance of Enola Gay is that it's a symbol of the rise of technology, especially in terms of the military airplane. Innovation that's made aircraft fly higher, faster, and farther. And this airplane was the epitome of that development, starting in the 1920s through 1945. So it's the modern airplane in every sense of the word. The scope and the awareness of the importance of that mission, I think it's seen at a high level as a very important weapon. It's going to be shaping the immediate post-war period. For the individuals on the airplane, like Robert Caron, who's the tail gunner, he takes a picture of that mushroom cloud coming up over Hiroshima. He records that moment. Robert Lewis, writes in his diary later, oh my God, what have we done? So the crew they're soaking it in. What does this really mean? For the Japanese, they do not answer the request to surrender. So August 9th, Nagasaki's attacked. But it takes the second bombing that the Emperor of Japan, who's never spoken to his people, he says, we are now, because of this new weapon, going to surrender. And so that's an unprecedented moment in the history of Imperial Japan. The Enola Gay is a very important artifact, not only for the American people, but for the world overall. It's a symbol of the height of technology in terms of aeronautics and what a national culture did with the technology to win World War II. And so it's a symbol not only of the people who flew the mission, but also the people that actually fought the war overall. And especially in that idea for the American mindset, will this war ever end and how can we end that war? So it's a very important symbol in that regard. But also in terms of the overall use of nuclear weapons, it's a flashpoint for the discussion of what nuclear weapons and what role they should play in the modern defense establishment.
The aircraft behind me is the B-29 boxcar. This airplane ended World War II. It dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. This airplane is significant because even though it dropped the second atomic bomb, the war wasn't ended after the first bomb was dropped. And there was a lot of discussion about, well, should we drop the second bomb? Should we not? But it was pretty clear that the Japanese were going to continue to fight. The option that was left other than dropping the atomic bomb was a massive invasion of Japan, which would have resulted in millions of casualties among the Allies and among the Japanese. So the decision was made to drop this second bomb, and actually the target for that bomb was supposed to be a Japanese city called Kokura, but it turns out that there was smoke obscuring the city from a bombing raid that was nearby on that day, and the instructions were that they were to be able to actually see the target, not use radar bombing, which they had that capability. So after 3 runs over Kokura and running low on fuel, the decision was made to attack the alternate target, which was Nagasaki. As the crew approached Nagasaki, it was covered in clouds, and so they were a bit concerned, will they have to bomb by radar or just ditch the bomb in the ocean? But just as they were about to go over the city, the clouds parted, they were able to see the target, and they bombed visually. The B-29 was really a unique aircraft to begin with. It could fly farther, higher, faster, carry a heavier bomb load than nearly any bomber developed during World War II. It really was revolutionary. But the B-29s that were used for the atomic bombing raids were special B-29s. They had been specially modified to carry atomic bombs. The turrets that were on normal B-29s were taken off. The armor was taken off, so it lightened them. They could fly farther, a little faster, a little higher. They also modified the bomb bays to be able to carry these atomic weapons. Both the Fat Man and the Little Boy weighed about 10,000 pounds. The B-29 boxcar carried the Fat Man bomb. And in fact, it really was the only bomber that the U.S. had at the time that could carry the Fat Man bomb.
This is a Martin B-26 Marauder named Flakbait. It's a medium bomber that flew with the 9th Air Force during World War II. And it's the American airplane that flew the most missions of any other during that conflict. The 9th Air Force was a tactical air force, and so they flew in support of an anticipation of the Allied invasion in June 1944, and then they went across into France and Belgium to support that force as they rolled across Northern Europe. In August 1943, flies all the way to the end of the war till May of 1945. Missions include flying during the D-Day invasion in support of that, during the Battle of the Bulge. And so the missions that these type of aircraft would have flown would have been to affect the outcome of the war on the battlefield. So they would have been flying against troop concentrations, rail yards, signal stations, just a way that they can disrupt the way the Nazis could fight against the Allies. I think it's 150,000 tons of bombs are dropped by B-26s. And so it's a fast airplane in which it's a 220 mile per hour cruise, but it lands about 100 miles an hour. So there's a very small window of operational of slow to fast with this airplane. But they do their job very well, and the crews that use them really learn to love this airplane. What's so unique about Flakbait is it starts out with an original crew, and they're led by Jim Farrell. He's called the boss. You can see his name on the side of the fuselage, and he names the airplane Flakbait, which is a combination of the German word for and his brother's dog back home named Fleabait. And so this original crew, they fly in Flakbait, and they do their certain number of missions, and they go home. And the airplane stays with the 449th Bomb Squadron, and it's just an airplane that other crews fly. If their airplane's down, they fly in it. If they have a crew of mix and match, these guys fly the airplane as well. So there's really up to 100 different individuals have flown this airplane over the course of those 200 missions. Flak bait is really important in the sense that no crew were lost in this airplane. At one point there's cannon damage where the plexiglass nose disintegrates in the face of the bombardier. They lose an engine, they lose the electrical system, but it always gets back. So every mission, that sense of its survivability. But it's also seen by the crews as that's kind of like the beat up airplane at the corner of the airfield that they didn't really want to fly, and they were stuck in, but it always came back. June of 1944, flak bait reaches its 100th mission. A week before, another B-26 makes a 100th mission. So that's showing these airplanes are getting the missions, the crews are getting the experience, they're building up this tally of experience. And so in terms of flak bait being known for what it was actually pretty unknown. When it reached that 200th mission though, it's April 17th, 1945. And it makes the newspapers, it makes the military newspapers especially. But what's interesting about that story is that you're getting towards the end of the war. There may be an end in sight, there may not be. But there's a story of this airplane named flak bait. How many bombs it's dropped, how it's a survivor. And it leads this bomb group, the 322nd bomb group, to a target in Germany and back. And so it's sort of just part of the news, of what's going on in the war. So it's not seen as this great war here. It's not known like other airplanes that we're going to come to know in the lore of World War II. But the Army Air Forces at the end of the conflict, May 1945 in Europe, the chief of the Army Air Forces, Henry Hap Arnold, sets this airplane specifically aside. So other B-26s are being demolished because it's a type that's not going to survive into the post-war period. And they set this airplane aside to say, we're going to put this in a museum to save it for its record of service during World War II. It's a time capsule of the air war over Europe during World War II. And this is an original airplane. It's got some damage from being transported back to the U.S. It's been stored. It's gotten dirtier over the years, but it's essentially as it was at the end of that conflict when it was disassembled. And so the primary goal of this project is to clean and stabilize and preserve the artifact and then put it on display as a fully assembled airplane. The first time it's been all together since 1946.
During the early 1920s, the military needed to find a way to keep aircraft in the air longer. Early methods involved wing walkers carrying gas tanks on their backs, but the risks outweighed the benefits and a new solution was needed to be found. The result was nothing short of what looked like an aerial stunt: 4 pilots, 2 biplanes, and a hose drop from one plane to the other. This was the start of aerial refueling. The next advancements came years later with modifications added to the B-29 using a loop hose method. Using this system, in February 1949, an American B-50 Super Fortress, the Lucky Lady, flew non-stop around the world in 94 hours and 1 minute. Yet this method still proved unreliable, particularly in bad weather. New high-altitude jet bombers meant a better way was needed. A flying boom with a telescoping pipe was added to the B-29, and the first KB-29Ps went into service. While the KB-29s experienced a series of upgrades to the boom system, the B-29's aging airframe and narrow fuel offload capability limited its effectiveness, and in 1950, the KC-97 became the Air Force's first ordered and designated tanker. Dubbed the Stratotanker, the KC-97 quickly became the most numerous Strategic Air Command tanker, with more than 800 built. Nearly every B-47 wing had a KC-97 air refueling squadron assigned to it. Even though they were new, the KC-97 had several limitations. While a single KC-97 could refuel a B-47, it took 2 or more to refuel a B-52 and took a significant amount of time for a KC-97 to get to cruising altitude. The bomber would have to slow down to drop to the KC-97's altitude while still maintaining enough speed to stay in the air, burning a significant amount of the fuel it had just taken on. Fortunately, the KC-135 was in development. In 1957, the Air Force procured 29 of them as an interim solution, but over the next 20 years, Strategic Air Command ended up maintaining nearly a 1-to-1 ratio of KC-135s to B-52s. Now, after nearly 60 years of contributions to countless operations, the KC-135 is being joined by the next generation of air refueling systems, the KC-46A Pegasus.
Originally designated the A-26, the B-26 Invader was a fast, heavily armed attack aircraft that the Air Force used in World War II, during the Korean War, and even into the Southeast Asia War in the 1960s. The Invader was custom designed to attack ground targets behind enemy lines. One version of the Invader had 14 .50 caliber machine guns that could fire forward. Very effective. The Invader also had a pretty good bomb load. It carried 4,000 pounds of bombs in an internal bomb bay and 2,000 more pounds underneath the wings. The Invader had an effect in combat that was all out of proportion to the numbers. There were only about 2,500 Invaders built. And the Invader was very fast. It went about 350 miles an hour. And it replaced another medium bomber during World War II, and it entered combat in 1944. There were two main types of Invaders. There was the hard-nose Invader, and that had a solid nose with 6 or 8 machine guns in it. And then there was a glass-nose Invader, and that typically carried a Norden bomb sight and would be used for level bombing. Well, the Invader didn't see combat until 1944, kind of late in World War II. It stayed in Air Force service, and then when the Korean War started in 1950, its utility was readily apparent. It was used initially for day bombing attacks behind enemy lines, just like in World War II, hitting trains and supply dumps and things like that. But when the Communists introduced the MiG-15 in the fall of 1950, the Invader's missions then went to nighttime missions and were used through the war on these nighttime attack missions, attacking the same types of targets. So the Invader story did not stop at the end of the Korean War, and even though this aircraft was designed and built in World War II, it was still an effective aircraft going into the late 50s and into the 1960s. When the French were engaged in heavy combat in Southeast Asia, the U.S. Air Force sent a number of B-26s from Korea via the Philippines and loaned them to the French Air Force. And in fact, the U.S. Air Force also sent 200 aircraft mechanics to work on these Invaders, along with a few other aircraft types that the Air Force sent. So the French used these Invaders in their combat against the Viet Minh in the mid-1950s. Later, early in the war in Southeast Asia, the U.S. Air Force sent, once again, these Invaders into combat because their speed, their loiter time, their range, and the powerful armament that they carried was still effective. Unfortunately, these Invaders were getting tired, and one Invader, its wings broke and it crashed, and that also happened here in the States. So the Invaders were grounded, but the type still had use. The Air Force contracted to have 40 Invaders heavily modified specifically for use in Southeast Asia. The company that modified them was called On Mark, and what they did is they added fuel tanks to the wingtips, they added more weapon pylons to the wings, they strengthened the wings, strengthened the fuselage, and enlarged the tail surfaces, and also added more effective reversible propellers. And these aircraft, now called counter-invaders, were the most effective truck-killing aircraft that the Air Force had until the introduction of gunships.
This is a Boeing B-29 Super Fortress. This particular model built in July '45, so it did not see any World War II combat history. It became a training B-29, so even in Korea it did not go overseas. And then it was decommissioned and it was sent to the Naval Weapons Depot Center in China Lake, California. I'm not sure why it went to a Navy place, but it did. It was in there with a group of airplanes that basically forgotten. They didn't seem to have an inventory list on it anywhere, and so when the CAF was looking for one, there would seem to be none to be had anywhere. And then somebody happened to spot them, happened to fly overhead, spot the airplanes, and with that they did a deeper search, and in fact they found this airplane on inventory. And so the Air Force then donated to the Commemorative Air Force. The design of the aircraft was to essentially be able to reach Japan. And so it's a long-range bomber, very advanced for its day, the first pressurized aircraft, the first aircraft to have remote gun sights. So it has a sort of a very basic, by today's standards, rather crude computer, but a good computer that would work. And all the gunner had to do was to get the sight on the aircraft for 1 second, and it was a sure kill. Very, very accurate. And if you'll notice that there are fewer guns than gunner positions. And so if an aircraft passed from left to right, the left gunner would have the gun and then release it to the right gunner. The gun would swing around and then be available to the other gunner. Very advanced for its day. They were put into production before they was really fully tested. It had a lot of errors, a lot of bugs in it, if you will. And things were modified while they were being produced. You know, we really don't do that today. We get something that's pretty much complete and operational, meeting certain criteria before we start producing, you know, thousands of them or hundreds of them in these days. But in those days, they needed them right away. So they would modify an airplane on the fly, or they'd have kits to modify them in the field afterwards. And so initially they had problems. And in fact, at the very early part of their use, they had more operational losses than combat losses. And it was tough on the crews because they were working with something that was they felt was unsafe. But they stuck with it, and little by little, the kits and improvements, and they figured out how to fly it and how to modify it, and it became a good, safe airplane. And it was very, very effective at what it did. I have a special tie to this plane. My father was a B-29 project guy during World War II, and he joined the CAF in 1960, and they decided it needed a complete set of World War II American aircraft initially. And he didn't feel the collection would be complete without a B-29, and out of the over 3,600 made, there were none to be had anywhere. There were only a few that were in guard posts or museums. They finally found this one just out of luck. He paid for the restoration of it, and then they named it Fifi after my mother. And so he flew it for a number of years. He's now passed away, and I'm now, the last 4 years I've been flying the airplane, and it's a thrill.